Hello, welcome to Books in the World. This is a collaboration with the Cape Cod Writers Center. My name is Richard Bodertha, and today I'll be your host. We're here today with our guest, Barbara Epic Struna, who's written 3 different novels about Cape Cod, and the third one, a combination of Cape Cod and California. Her latest is called The Old Cape Hollywood Secret. Welcome, Barbara, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me here. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Give us a little outline, if you will, about the 3 books, how they came, how they evolved, which one came first. Just a brief background about your series.
Well, the first one was, of course, the Old Cape House. And I created a modern-day character, a woman, about 40-something, and she goes in her backyard, newly moved to the Cape in Brewster, and she finds a root cellar. And at the bottom is evidence that links her land to Sam Bellamy. He's our local pirate.
Yeah.
And his...
Of the Widow.
Of the pirate ship Widow.
The legend of the Widow.
That's correct. Sunk off our coast in 1717. And so what I do is the modern-day character finds a clue in one chapter. In the very next chapter, you will then meet the character from whatever time period or legend or story that I am writing about. And so then I go back and forth in alternating chapters. So she becomes the vehicle that moves the story in each of the books.
By
she is
she,
a recurring.
you mean the private investigator?
Yeah,
or
well, she's an amateur sleuth, actually. She doesn't really look
a Miss Marple
for things.
kind of character?
No,
a little
I
younger,
guess.
maybe?
Yes, yeah. And so that's what she does, and she continually finds things that people overlook and make connections, and she's curious, and you'll always meet the character in the next chapter, why she's finding a clue, or maybe why she's not finding something, and you know because you're now reading in that time period in the next chapter.
I see.
You can go back and forth.
Okay. So in each of the books, you have time periods that you jump back and forth
That's
in?
correct.
In this case, the Old Cape Hollywood Secret, you go back to the 40s.
Right, 1947.
In the other books, you go back like The Legend of the Widow and Sam Bellamy.
18th century, 1700, 1717, and then in the second book, The Teapot, we go fast forward about to 1720.
Okay.
And so I'm dealing with the aftermath of the first book or the story after the wreck.
Now, I think when we were talking earlier, before we were on film here, on TV, that you don't write about anything that you haven't had some experience with.
Exactly.
Now, the Old Cape Cod house, I think, as I recall reading some of the background material on you, came through conversions of 3 different things. One was a brick patio that you found under about 10 inches of dirt.
Right.
Of your new house after moving from Ohio, I believe.
That's correct.
You bought a house here in Brewster.
In fact, the house on the cover is our house.
Oh. So in the backyard, you found this brick patio, what's now called a patio. Back then, when it was made, it probably wasn't called a patio.
I'm not sure.
But you went to a museum about Sam Bellamy as well.
Right.
And then thirdly, you found an old shard of a piece of pottery.
Right.
So those were 3 things that kind of, the confluence of those 3 things gave you a sort of germination for
well, I was finishing up the first book.
Yeah.
And I was about 3/4 of the way. I found that pottery shard.
Oh, okay.
On the bay. And I said, you know, I bet I could write a story about there were 2 pirate survivors that we know recorded in history from the Widow.
Yeah.
And I said, maybe this could be a part of that story. It could be a part of a China set or something that was on board at the time of the wreck. And then this could be part of it somehow.
So you were well into writing the story when you found this shard.
Right. Whenever I'm finishing up a story, the next one is birthing in the back of my head.
By story, you mean the next book?
The next book.
Okay.
Right.
The next book.
Right.
Okay. All right. Now, the Old Cape Hollywood Secret has a lot of California and Hollywood in it. And at one point, it was called Hollywood Land. Describe a little bit about your knowledge of California, Hollywood, your travels there, and the inception of this book about Hollywood and about the Cape.
Well, I have two sons that, my oldest and my youngest, that live in Hollywood.
Oh.
And so for the last 4 years or so, I've been traveling to Hollywood, and probably 3 times a year. And so when I go, they also work for a production company there in Hollywood. So I'm very close to the Hollywood, so to speak. And so I see a lot of the things that are interesting to me. It's amazing how historic Hollywood is. You would think that it would be all gone, but it isn't. 1926, 1930, 1947, some of those buildings are still there. Some of the restaurants, some of the hotels.
The Pig and Whistle, for instance?
That's exactly right. It's still there. And the Georgian Hotel, which I, of course, had to stay at because my modern day character did, and also a character in 1947 worked there. So I tied that all together. And that's how it all evolved. I had the story, the little kernel for this story in my head when my oldest son moved 10 years ago to Hollywood. And he was digging a patio in Venice Beach next to his apartment in trade for rent for 1 month. And he did not find what the character did in this book, but he did dig a patio. And that's where this idea came in my head. Oh, I bet you could find something. And it would be somebody how related to Cape Cod and somebody that got murdered or whatever. And
well,
so I just started to thinking.
The jumping off point for the story is 2 young girls, young women, leave Cape Cod, the Brewster area, and go out to Hollywood.
Right.
What's their rationale, or what do they hope to do out there?
Well, the one character, Gertie.
Yeah.
She is the cousin of my main character in the 1940s,
Now, this is all
Maggie.
written in the third person.
Yes.
Whereas when you bring in your amateur sleuth,
Right, that's first person.
First person.
That's
so
correct.
It switches back and forth. Okay,
Right.
continue. I'm sorry.
No. And so Gertie wants to go off and become Hollywood starlet. And she...
How old is she?
She's 8. They're both 18.
Both 18.
And Maggie, who lives on the Cape, and their cousins, they both live in Brewster.
The main character, Maggie. Yep.
Maggie goes along for the summer just to go along with her as a friend. So the two of them leave. And of course, one returns home to Cape Cod, and the other one then just disappears, never returns home. And so that's when the story begins.
Yeah.
And
okay.
And then my modern day character, 70 years later, goes to modern day Hollywood and happens to pick up the trail of this person that never returned.
Now, your investigator, your sleuth, Nancy Caldwell.
Right.
Does she have anything in common with you?
Let's say this. I think the first book, The Old Cape House, mimics about 50% of me, my life, my children, my family, what we've done. The Teapot has about 30% of me.
Your second story.
Yeah, the second story. And The Secret, Hollywood Secret, has about 20%. I've decided to maybe step back a little bit from myself.
Right.
It's because I've had some people say that what my modern day character does is too far-fetched. And
now, what do you mean by some people?
In other words,
reviewers? Or,
yes, yes. Say, oh, that couldn't have happened. Why would somebody do that? Well, I did do that.
Right. You describe yourself as being somewhat adventurous.
Yes. Yeah.
Or maybe I should leave somewhat out. I'm not sure, but...
Well, pretty adventurous.
Yeah.
I'd like to go and open up that door when you know you're not supposed to.
Oh, I see. Well, you did move from Ohio. How old were you then? You're in,
we had
in
both,
your 40s?
my husband and I both turned 40. That was our...
and you left Ohio?
Yeah, we left our Ohio. We just felt that the Cape was better for my husband's professional career, who was a professional artist.
So that was the impetus for the move.
I think so, yes.
And he's maintained a livelihood as an artist throughout these years. At the beginning of his career, he taught.
Right.
He did the book, all the
did
covers.
all the covers, that's correct.
All the covers of your books. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just interesting. In fact, he had to actually join the company. The first two books were published traditionally with a little bit of hybrid thrown in, and he had to join the company in order for them to accept the covers of the book, because normally you don't get a choice in your covers.
Right.
And so they liked the covers, and he became part of the company, and that's how he.
That was for your the publisher for your first two books.
Right, right.
Then what happened to that publisher?
That publisher closed its doors, sadly, and left all of us, the authors, in sort of a conundrum.
Limbo.
Yeah, it was terrible. We had 30 days to take charge of our own books, because when, after 30 days, and seeing that the company closed, all the books would be taken off Amazon and all the outlets.
Oh.
They completely disappear, unless third market.
Before it was published, The Hollywood Secret was put on Amazon?
No, The Hollywood Secret was ready to be published in June, and they closed in May, right before that. So that put almost 8 months or so hold on The Hollywood Secret, because I had to become a publisher in 30 days.
Not only the author, but the publisher,
and the
marketer.
Yes, everything.
Agent, so to speak.
Right. I was lucky that I was able to keep in contact with my proofreader, my editor, and there was a second cover designer who fine-tuned all of the details that you need to have to make the cover proper when it's uploaded to
It takes
the
a
site.
village, doesn't it?
Yeah, so I was able to take them on, and what I did was I actually offered them contracts to work with me.
Yeah.
And pay them percentages of the royalties. Now that I get them all, I have to disperse them a couple times a year. So they were willing to go along with it based on my prior sales that they were making money on. So it worked out.
Yeah.
But it was a real eye-opener as far as how to do things and how to keep going.
Oh, I can imagine. Oh, you didn't get much writing done then.
I did not.
You completed the book, but...
right. Thank goodness I did. Right.
Mm-hmm. Now, you said at one point, I can't remember where I read it, but you were not influenced, but one of your favorite authors was William Martin, who wrote the Cape Cod and also Back Bay. And I believe he shifts back and forth between the present and...
I fell in love with that technique. It's a technique that a lot of authors use. And
combined with the third person and the first person.
Yes. And
not only the time period shift, but also the point of view shift.
Yeah, I think so. You almost have to do that.
Yeah.
You know, when you're dealing with modern day like that, it is.
See.
Yeah. And I like to bring history. I like to read historical fiction.
Yeah.
I like to read about history, and I love it. But I also like to bring it forward to the present day. And so that's what I try to do. I try to make my readers see that.
You really don't label your books as mysteries, per se.
No, right.
Because as I believe you told me, you know, the villain, so to speak, is usually brought up earlier on in the book.
Right. And so in a real mystery, you don't know who the bad guys are and what's happening. In mine, you do know the bad guys. And so I learned that they were originally labeled as mysteries, but they're really not, because you know who the bad guy is. You're assuming, you kind of figure it out. And they're more of a suspense thriller because you don't know what path they're taking.
Oh, I see. So
to get to that end.
It's the avenues that the killer or the...
Not much surprises, really. A little bit, you know, but other than that, they have mysterious elements to them, but they're really suspenseful, maybe, a little bit more than...
Yeah. What's your opinion about foreshadowing? Is there certain things that you might let the reader in on? I know you let the reader in on the villain right away, but about what he's thinking or what she's thinking?
I try to only foreshadow once, maybe another time, maybe twice, but usually only once, and that's usually in the beginning.
I see.
And I will put I don't like to even call it a prologue, it's just a chapter. I won't label it a prologue.
Yeah.
But it usually begins with something that happens in the middle of the story and just a little excerpt to get you interested to read. And then I go back 3 months before it happened, or whatever time period I do.
Do you write chronologically? In other words,
I do at that point. After that, I do.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Okay. So I was going to ask you what your writing process looks like.
Yeah.
I mean, do you have shoe boxes around the house with pages of manuscript here in one box, and for the beginning of the book, and another box for another chapter?
I was on a panel last year at the International Thriller Writers.
Oh, you were?
And the panel was about, were you a pantser, a hybrid, or a plotter when you do your books? And I actually was a hybrid because...
Well, describe the three.
Well, a pantser is that you don't know where the end is going.
Yep.
Yeah, seat of your pants.
Yep.
You just kind of write and it flows.
Yep.
A plotter is very methodical, and they have a board, a chalkboard or a whiteboard, and they have this, 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 and this, and my character is going to do this and that and this. And a hybrid kind of takes it together.
I see.
And so basically I know the beginning, the middle, and the end, but I don't know what happens in between. And if I have to invent a new character or put a little bit of a twist, as long as I still get to the middle and the end, I'm okay. So I'm more of a hybrid.
I see. But the historical aspect of writing in the story is a big motivation for you.
Yes.
You do like history.
I do. And the first book, The Old Cape House, probably took a good 10 to 12 years before I really got it together with all my research and everything. The second book, The Old Cape Teapot, took about maybe 5 years because I had already researched that time period of the 18th century. And The Hollywood Secret probably took me about 2 years to really write it because I could go and visit and see a lot. Yeah,
right.
And visit and actually go to the places that I'm talking
about.
Well,
you were inspired by your travels out to...
Right.
Yeah. What's the distinct... I know in the book you call it Hollywood land.
Yeah. It's on the cover.
And that sounds unusual to some people who are used to just Hollywood.
Yeah, actually in 1927, I think, it started out Hollywood land as a housing development. Oh. And it didn't do very well. So the sign deteriorated and got worse, and the land kind of fell off, and it was kind of half on in about 1949 or so. And I think it was in the 70s that Hugh Hefner from Playboy magazine had a big fundraiser, and he wanted to restore the sign, and then they just dropped the land, of course. And
we're talking about the big white sign.
The big sign that you see in the Santa Monica Mountains, right?
Yeah.
So that's how that started. But in 1947, it still said Hollywood land.
Oh, is that right?
1949, it actually fell away. So.
Now, you mentioned that one of your sons, or two of your sons, are out in Hollywood now. What do they do?
Yeah, they work in, they actually work for Bad Robot, J.J. Abrams
Bad Robot or
Bad, B-A-D, Robot.
Oh, okay.
And J.J. Abrams in the production company there in Santa Monica.
And they own the print or the label for...
Oh, he does the Star Wars franchise.
Star Wars?
Right.
Oh, wow.
It's kind of fun, and there's a lot of secrets that they can't tell me, even though I like to pick their brain about what's happening and what's going on next, but they're very good at keeping secrets.
Oh, they know their mom's a writer,
yes,
so
right.
they got to be very careful.
Yeah, they do, right. And when I go visit them, it's kind of fun because they, usually my one son, the oldest, lives in Agora Hills, so when I'm taking my flight out or landing, either one, I have to wait either till he goes home, if I'm in early, or I have to go in with him early in the morning if my flight's in the afternoon. And so they set me up in an office at the company, and it's kind of fun because I have my own office there that I can write. And they all know that I write stories.
Oh, yeah.
It's just kind of cute. You know,
sure.
These are the Struna boys. Their mom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you had 5 children.
I did.
And or you had
my
5
husband
children.
and I did.
Right.
Same husband.
Yeah. But when you moved from Ohio, had you been writing all along, or is this something you began in your 40s?
Actually,
well, your mother inspired you too.
Yes, she did, and I always like to tell a good story. My mother told good stories, and
was she a gossip?
No, no, no. She used to have us make up things, and
Well,
that's-
gossip in a good
and we
sense,
would
I-
always go for walks and adventure
I
and
see.
explore stuff. So that's
Yeah.
probably where I get it from.
Yeah.
And but I really did not write. I kept a journal though since I was about 11, and I would write that way, and I still have them all the way through my married life when all the children when they were little and as they grew. And then when we moved here in 1988,
That's when you bought the house.
that we bought the old house,
Yeah.
and those things started to happen in my head, and then the Witta Museum and Sam Bellamy came into my head, and I said,
Yeah.
I could tell a story about this. I know
Right.
it. This house has a lot of secrets, and I'm going to find them.
Right. Right.
And it's funny, I had 2 children when we moved. I had 3 teenagers when we moved here, similar to what's the story
Unhappy
in the book.
teenagers.
Unhappy ones.
About the move from Ohio
Right.
to here.
Teenagers, I don't blame them.
Well, they were in high school. They
Right.
had all
One
their
was going
friends.
off to college. That was
Yeah.
okay. One was starting high school. That was okay. But the middle one was going to be a junior in high school. That was hard on him and me. And then I became pregnant with the 4th one, and then we decided, well, let's have another one so that she wouldn't be an only child.
I see.
But I used to tell stories and make them up. And I would tell them when they would go to bed at night, stories about what we did during the day. And I would put them into the story.
In
Always.
what you were writing.
Yeah, what I was telling them, a
Oh,
story,
oh,
a
I'm
bedtime story. And one time my son, who's now 26, working out in Hollywood, he said, Mom, can't you just tell me a regular story? I said, don't make it up. Just tell me, just read a regular story. So,
Right.
you know, that's how I do it.
Well, it's quite an accomplishment. I mean, you raised a family. You've written 3 books here. What can you tell us about persistence of an author?
You know,
I know
That's right.
you mentioned your husband is an artist and is one of the 1 percentile, I think, that actually makes a living wage.
yeah, less than 1%
Yeah.
actually.
So
as an artist.
he obviously was very persistent in pursuing his passion.
Right.
But as far as an author, describe to us how persistent you are, or you've had to be, and speak to a writer who's up and coming, and let them know how much work it is.
Well, I think the bottom line is never give up. And I think,
Have you met
I have-
with rejection?
oh yeah, the first one was rejected close to 100 times.
Wow.
And
By 100 published?
100 different publishers. I did have 4 full requests, not a half request or just a little blurb, but 4 full ones. And I sent them off to the agents and waited. And one by one, they said no, but they also wrote what was lacking or missing. And they all said the same thing.
They did.
So I rewrote the book completely with those things in mind. And it worked.
I see.
And then I sent out another dozen or so, and I got a contract with this company,
Right.
Book Trope it was called.
Yeah.
And I think living with a never give up attitude with my husband as an artist
Right.
helped.
Oh, it did. Yeah.
It did. And there's always somebody out there that's going to want to read that book, and don't ever give up, really.
Right.
It pays to, and you have to do, it's a lot of work,
Yeah.
first of all.
No one writes a book alone. Who's helped you along the way? Not names, but people in your life that friends. You've obviously.
I do have 2 writers groups.
Oh.
I go to 2 writer groups, and they have really helped me a lot because I would go every week.
Yeah.
So that meant I was going twice a week to writer groups.
And you're also now president of the
I
Cape
am.
Cod Writers Center.
Now, the Cape Cod Writers Center, I first came to join in 2012, I think.
Oh, you did. Okay.
I just, right, and I think without the center, I wouldn't be where I am right now either.
Why is that?
Well, number one, it was great to be with other authors who are like-minded. That's great. And the center gave you opportunities to speak in front of an audience, to get up and say something, to tell your little elevator pitch in one sentence or two of your book, and to get
condense
yourself,
it
to condense
and make
and
it
helped
pithy.
me.
Yeah.
Right, and it provided the conferences that I would go to every year, and where you hone your skills, and it gave me all these great opportunities, and I think they were a big influence on my life, which is why I stayed with them and decided, they asked me to be on the board of directors, I think 2015 or 14, something like that, and I did. And
I'd like you to describe how somebody who's interested in writing can get a hold of the Cape Cod Writers Center, somebody here on the Cape. And also I'd like you to explain here in the next 2 minutes here how people can order your books.
Okay. The Cape Cod Writers Center has that was one of my goals when I became president of it, was to update our website, and which is what we did. And so you can go on Cape Cod Writers Center, it pops up right away. There's a lot of information there. It tells you what we're doing. It lists all of the authors' books, their publications, their bios. You can click on there to see. And that's the best way. There's a contact.
Yeah.
Best way to get a hold of us, become a member. It's a lot of camaraderie. And we have a writer's night out meetings once a month.
Writing is very isolating. So
it is. It is.
Now your books, how can someone interested in your books?
The books can be bought in any independent bookstore on the Cape or across the country. They're listed on Ingram, which is the catalog that all the bookstores apply to, and also Baker and Taylor. You can buy those. And then also you can get them on Amazon. You can get them on Nook, Barnes & Noble. You can get them on iTunes, iBooks. So they're really all over.
Do you have any plans for a fourth book?
I do.
Oh.
I have a fourth son who lives in Juneau, Alaska.
Oh.
A third son, I take that back, third son. And he lives in Juneau, Alaska. And I've been going there, I make the triangle to visit. I go to Juneau and then to LA and back and so on. And it's going to be about Provincetown in 1898 and Alaska in 1898.
Sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Barbara. Here we are with her latest book again, The Old Cape Hollywood Secret, a wonderful read, and we look with a lot of anticipation for your fourth book. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right.